I invite everybody to introduce themselves in the chat, and so that we can all get to know each other and understand a little bit about what we are, where we're coming from, and what we bring, and what we're looking to accomplish over the next year. Let me spend a minute or two just providing a little bit of a roadmap of what we're going to do over the next hour. And then we'll quickly jump in while everyone continues to introduce themselves. I'm going to spend a couple of minutes talking about why, at least I believe this topic is important, and hopefully you do too, and that's why you joined today. And then share a little bit about the research basis for a lot of the information that I'm planning to share. And then really get into the meat of this, which are the 7 keys to professional growth. And my hope is that we'll finish this up and then have some time for Q&A at the end of today's session. Okay. I also want to make this a dialogue to the extent that you want it to be a dialogue, and that we can make sure that this learning is relevant. It's hard to see everybody on the screen, but if you have a question, drop it in the chat. And I'm monitoring that. I have a few screens going. So if you have questions, drop them in the chat, and I would be more than happy to address them. Okay.
I can also pay attention if anybody uses the right hand function, or just waves your hand as well.
Thank you, Emma. We'll be a team on that front. And just so that you know who I am, my name is Rachel Wexler, and I am an executive coach, an advisor, and a speaker. And I work with people primarily in transitions in their career. Transitions mid-career, and you could say, okay, that makes sense. And then you can also say, well, that explains most of someone's career. And it's true that we are always in some kind of transition. So whether my clients are in a current role and they are looking to take their career to the next level, or if they are starting a new role and want to work through some of what has happened to them or what they have done in the past in order to have a greater impact and ease in their next role. Those are some of the times that I work with people, and typically it all boils down to a couple things. It is about self-awareness, and it is also the awareness in the context in which someone is operating. So that's about individual relationships, organizational cultures and norms, and sometimes those interpersonal dynamics that are holding people back. And it's an opportunity to really dive into them and understand them, and at the same time work through practical ways to move through them. I come to this work as a former executive in the ed tech industry, where I was in charge of programs focused on adult learning, and as a management consultant. So I come to this work with the headset of a leader who has a really firsthand understanding of what it takes to lead, to work with people, to get people working with you, and to juggle the various expectations that are really present in today's work world. I'm also the incoming vice president of Temple Israel of Boston. And what brings me to this topic and to this work and through this medium is a strong belief that stories are a powerful tool that connect us, that motivate us, and that encourage us to grow. And in today's world, where we, in so many, almost in nearly every industry, people are working across locations. They are working across media. So whether someone is in the office and someone is working remotely, or whether people are working hybrid schedules and there's always somebody different in the office, we are connected to hundreds, if not thousands of people. And we've lost the ability to really know each other. And so for young people who are starting out, they have less access to the stories, to the wisdom, to the experience of leaders that many people in prior generations have had. And so through the concept of Lador Vador, if we tie it to a Jewish context, I am very much focused on using those stories and the lived experience of leaders to share them with the people who are starting out or in mid-career. Because too often in our world today, we read about Hollywood actresses or Fortune 500 CEOs, and the way that the content is provided is to make them, to normalize them and to make them seem more like us. Whereas what we've really lost in is the fabric of the examples of people who maybe 20 years ago might have been on the front section of the Boston Globe or some other regional newspaper, whose lived experience and whose experience in general is more relatable to more people. I share this because my own role models were my grandmothers. One went to medical school in the 1930s, so you can imagine she didn't have many Jewish classmates or female classmates in general. My other grandmother had a personality that was larger than life. She was a wonderful chef who finished her career with a television show as part of the local news. And so the two of them really complemented each other. Both had purpose, both had passions, both encouraged their grandchildren, and particularly their granddaughters, to be fiercely independent, and both had a love of family and of Judaism. And I think that really explains where I come in today. And so just as you shared some of the things that you're all learning and what you want to do over the next year, my focus really is on improving my own public speaking. And so in many ways, this is a little bit of, I'm being vulnerable today as well. And so I hope that some of that comes through. I'm always open to feedback, and you'll see that ties to later in the presentation. So feel free to follow up, and if you have feedback or you have reactions to what we're going to discuss today, I would certainly love to hear it. So why is this topic important? When I put these talking points together several months ago, it was in the wake of the I don't know what word you want to use, but call it the devastation of USAID. And since then, I think whether we look to tariffs or immigration, science and research, higher education, it's hard to imagine any sector or industry that isn't impacted today with some high degree of uncertainty and unpredictability. We're also living at an age where we are seeing people making midlife career changes at every stage and age of their lives. So whether it is an opportunistic move or whether it is something that has happened involuntarily, we are seeing we're seeing a lot of movement or desire for movement in the workplace at a time where we're also seeing dwindling funds for professional development. And so why is this important? It's important because it is incumbent upon each of us to own our growth and our development, to identify the areas where we want to push ourselves, and to do so in a way that helps us build impact, find meaning, and continue to challenge ourselves throughout our career, which is tied to Jewish values of education and questioning and exploring. I mentioned that I've been doing some research in conjunction with my coaching and consulting practice. It's called the Jewel Project, which is an acronym for Joining and Empowering Women in the Exploration of Lived Experience. And this research is a series of 60 plus interviews to date around professional women leaders' journeys, with the intention of sharing their stories as tools for intergenerational learning around career insights and navigation support. The idea is to provide that access and those real candid reflections that the next generation of women can learn from. But really, the unexpected learning of this project is that many of these lessons, and most of them, are universal across all people, across their careers, or throughout their careers. So it's not just for young people in their 30s and early 40s. We are talking about established leaders who can find relevance and meaning in many of the lessons that have been shared by the interview subjects. And so with that long preamble, I'd love to dive into 7 keys to professional growth. With each of these lessons, I'll talk about them, and then I will share a couple different personal stories. These are not personal to me. You'll notice that each quote on the slides that will follow are attributed to a person's position, their title. The lessons, as I just mentioned, are universal. They are not tied to, they're not germane to any one role or industry. And I hope that over the course of these lessons and illustrative stories, that you will find things that resonate with you and from which you can grow and find some sort of meaning. And you say, well, why 7? To be honest, in most versions of this talk, there are 6 keys to professional growth. But as we are in a Jewish setting, and we are completing the 7 weeks of the Omer, and we are thinking about the mysticism of the number 7. I won't tell you which lesson, but one was added so that we could make sure that we tied to some Jewish teachings and customs. The first lesson that I start with, and I share this with every client I work with, is to always be learning and to be moving forward. We are dynamic individuals working and living in a dynamic world. And when we think about professional growth implies movement. It implies development. And at every stage of one's career, I would hope that that you are always learning and moving forward. Because if you're not, my advice would be, then you should find something that you want to learn, or an area of, a personal attribute or a learning edge that you can continue to push on. This isn't just about the beginning of one's career, but one of the most salient stories that I heard was a woman who was finishing graduate school. She now is a first-time CEO, but she was finishing graduate school, and her 2 options for jobs were, one of these was a national, very well-known NGO, and another was a small consulting firm that actually happened to be in Boston. And one name would have made her resume readable by nearly any employer after that moment. And the other organization she found at the right time in its own evolution, with the right manager who was so supportive and was very proactive about finding those new projects, those new areas for growth. And so she said, every time there was something new that the organization was doing, my manager would tap me to get involved. And she started as an entry-level consultant, and by the time she left, she was a partner 17 years later. And so this job that she had taken with an expectation of a 2 to 3 year time horizon ended up being 17 years long. That ended her in a CEO role. And so then some of you may say, well, that's not relevant to me. I'm an independent practitioner, or I'm not just finishing graduate school. I was recently talking to somebody who's also a former synagogue president, and she has an independent consultancy. She's had it for the past couple decades. And she said, at the beginning of COVID, I realized that I needed to find other ways to make myself relevant and to increase my visibility. And she said, I need to, one, say yes to every project that is tangentially relevant to what I've been doing. And I need to continue developing my skills and tools. I don't want to stay static, and I don't want to become irrelevant. And she said, in early April of 2020, she says, I'm going to learn a new tool. And she took an online course to learn predictive index, for example. But that cycle of learning continued and is still very much part of her practice today. Another example is sometimes it's not just the learning that one takes on proactively, but I was talking with a woman who was reflecting on, she's been at this wealth management firm for over 20 years. And part of my conversation with her was, how do you continue to be engaged and to keep learning and grow your career in the same organization? Because there's so many learnings to be had there. And she talked about so many managers who were so supportive and who kept helping her along and being that wind that in her sails. And then she said, I ended up in a project working for this individual who pushed me in a way that I had never been pushed before. And he was so specific in his feedback, and he was very generous with his constructive feedback. He was not generous with his praise. And she said, my first learning front was to not take his words personally, and to be able to pivot them into a learning tool more than anything. And as she continued to explain and to share about this experience, she said, I would work so hard on the strategy, and I would go into his office and I would present my strategy and ask for resources. And he would say, that's really well done. No, you're not getting those resources. And she had to push and to push. And later he came back to her and he said, you really worked as hard as you possibly could have, and I hope you learned through it. And she said, you know what? I've never learned so much in a process before, in a role before. And she reflected, she said, it wasn't enjoyable learning, but no one has pushed me harder. And so she was able to really appreciate that experience. And so with that, number one, always be learning. Number two is about regulating your emotions. We show up at work as ourselves. That is the goal. We are most effective when we are authentic. But at work, we self-regulate. So the key here is not in hiding your emotions. It is still, I would absolutely say, demonstrate your emotions. Tell people how you feel. Make sure if you are frustrated, if you are confused, if you are disappointed, and so on and so forth, make that known. However, you don't need to show every piece of your emotion and put that on the table. Everyone has a story about the example when somebody told them or they needed to tell someone else that you get that email, you are ready to respond in the moment, you write a response right away, and then you take a moment to breathe and say, I should never send that email. And you put it away and you bring it back a little while later. In this set of interviews, I interviewed one subject who happened to be the manager in this situation. And a few months later, I happened to interview another CEO who, interestingly, was the young, hot-headed person who was the subject of this event. And they both described this time where the escalation, there was a conversation, it was online, there were multiple people on this thread, and the conversation was escalating. And the boss went into this young woman's office. She wasn't actually that young. And she said, this needs to stop. And the person said, but she said, I do not want to hear your but. She said, the minute that you become so inflamed, she said, that is the time you shut your computer down, you walk outside, go for a walk around the block, take some deep breaths, and then come back and read that message again and respond and keep that level of calm. And so it doesn't matter how many times we hear this story. These are those moments when we have a choice, and the learning here is to recognize in that moment that you have a choice, and that let cooler minds prevail. Let the message have that same intensity, but in a way that others will listen to it. In a very different yet tangentially related scenario, I was talking with a woman who's one of the most impressive people I have ever met. And she said, we in general, and then she said, and women, we are often guilty of this. We come in, we are running 100 miles an hour. We want people to hear everything we know. We want to be respected for the information that is in our heads. And we come in hot and we share everything that's on our mind. And we are talking really fast because we want to get everything in. And she said, be paid in pauses. Because when you slow down and you give people a moment to think about what is being shared and to make meaning and give them a chance to deeply think about what you are talking about, your message is heard and it is felt. And she said, as a leader, I notice myself now. And if I am doing all of the talking, I need to stop for a minute and let the team talk, because only when the team has that time to talk during my pause are they making meaning from what is going on. Third, create new paradigms for yourself. What does that mean? So I have a very good friend who is one of the most impressive people in my life. She is brilliant. She is about 6 feet tall. She is stunning and she is theatrical. She can get an entire room to listen to her without a problem, as far as I'm concerned. And when we were having a deep conversation and she started talking about imposter syndrome, which many people can relate to, and I was actually surprised that she felt the same way. And she said, when I met her, she had just been teaching high school history for a few years before she went into a career that ultimately has landed her as a partner in a venture capital firm. And she said, I walk in and I'm in a boardroom with all of these people who are so impressive. And she said, and I get so nervous. And she said, so I sit there and I'm standing, I'm looking at them, and I imagine them to be ninth graders who are not going to listen to anything I say or even care unless I make things interesting and relevant to them. And so she changes the paradigm. She's no longer looking at a room of CEOs. Rather, she's thinking about them as ninth graders who could care less about being in classroom unless they are really engaged and ignited. At the same time, I also talked to a woman who went back to an experience she had about 50 years ago in her early 30s, where she was a brand manager at a global company, and her immediate boss was going on maternity leave for a 4 to 6 month period. And in her absence, this young woman was reporting to the head of the department, who had a multi-billion-dollar portfolio. And she thought, oh my gosh, I am so nervous. What is he going to think of me? How am I going to have these one-on-ones with him? He's going to be looking at me and questioning everything I do. And she, gets in her head and starts to escalate. And upon going on maternity leave, her boss said to her, actually, you can't worry about what he thinks because he doesn't really care about you. He's giving you 15 to 30 minutes once a week or every other week. And he wants to just make sure that the trains are on track and they're still going, and that there are no crises. That's really all he wants to know. And this young woman said, wow, that's liberating. He's not looking to form me into something special or to question me every step of the way. He just wants to make sure that things are okay. She's like, I can do this. And so her boss said to her, just go in and learn what you can. You have this audience. So instead of viewing this as this high stakes, really challenging boardroom type scenario, think of it as a tutorial in school and ask questions. And she was able to do that. And she said, I never really had 6 months of such accelerated learning in all of my career. Number 4, surround yourself with diverse voices and recognize that people see things differently based on their background. And the minute you recognize that and turn and take a different look at how you communicate with people and what they share, then you will not only build a better idea as a group, but you will also communicate those ideas to others, to other stakeholders, to your teams, in ways that are that can be learned and understood and acted upon by a much larger group of people. What does that mean? One woman was talking about founding her company, and she said she hired 3 different people to start. I think there was a technologist, there was an operations person, and there was a designer. And she said, we were 3 people with different talents, different passions, different approaches to work, and different ways of talking about that work. And she said that was a good thing. That diversity of voice really helped that we could communicate with virtually anybody who later joined the company. And then she talked specifically about one person she hired, her CTO. And she said, when I met him, he was so impressive. She said, I never thought I could afford him. But in talking with him, she understood he was building a house and he needed a certain amount of money in order to build that house. And he liked her idea and he had this need. And so acting on his passion, plus knowing what he needed and what she needed, she was able to find a way to bring him on. And he stayed through the entirety of this company until they sold it to a different buyer. And it was really, she said, it was having that diversity of voice and understanding what he was bringing to the table and what he needed, as well as what I needed. Likewise, a CEO of a global consulting firm shared about her relationships with colleagues across races and ethnicities and experiences. And she said specifically, when there's a presumption of good faith and trust, and when you can share your experiences and be vulnerable in your learning, that you take in things that might be subtext, but really are the glue to building teams, building working teams, and building greater organizations, and really understanding where people are coming from. When I was speaking with a woman who is a lawyer by training, she grew up in a corporate law firm before moving into government work, and she was from the Bronx. And she said she remembered going to bed as a kid and looking through the bars in the windows, and she would watch her mom come home from work and lock the car and check around the car to make sure, because they were so used to cars being broken into in the middle of the night and hearing that alarm. And she said, so there are certain triggers that I have that most people I work with do not share, but I have this fight or flight syndrome that I've grown to realize in myself, but so have the people around me. And so when they see me reacting in a moment, that there's a symbiotic relationship that really helps each other stay grounded in being and understanding that. And that's in the beauty of diverse voices. The fifth one, in case you're getting tired, I wanted to put in one of my favorite lessons in the middle. And there's no substitute for this whatsoever, is clear and direct communication. I share that in the context of a conversation I had with somebody who talked about early in her career, she was really good at giving her team great feedback, telling them they were doing a good job. But when it came to giving them constructive feedback, she was timid, she was afraid, and she held back. You may have been in a role where you knew that you weren't meeting the expectations that your manager had for you, or that your manager's manager may have had for your department, but you didn't really know what you were doing in order to meet that bar. And the learning that I took from this conversation, and so I have taken a little liberty with this, but is really about delivering feedback in a way that you would want to receive it. So you're trying to give somebody feedback and you're not really sure how to do it. Very few times will you ever hear somebody say that somebody communicated with me constructively, directly, and with empathy and understanding. And in that exchange, I really understood what they were trying to say. And so everyone, very rarely does somebody say, I don't want any feedback and I want to live in this place of, with this cloud over me. And so if you can really think about delivering that feedback in a way that you would want to receive it. And then if you can get a little bit further, think about how that person would want to receive it. But that direct connection, that direct articulation really leaves very little for interpretation and makes it easier for somebody to meet. Likewise, another interviewee who's an executive at Google was talking about mentors in her life. And she said, she mentioned her father. Now, I share that in the context of L'Adore Vador. However, it's not common that, and I certainly don't promote the idea of having a parental relationship in the workplace. But I think the message was clear, and it was, the reason her father was so instrumental in her career, even though they never worked together, was that she said he's direct and he's straight up in a way that most others wouldn't dare to do. And she so respects that candor. That candid feedback, that real constructive criticism may sting in the moment, but as the recipient of that feedback sits with it and thinks about it, rarely do you hear somebody say that they wish they didn't receive it. I'll finish this point with a comment of somebody who looked back to early on in her career. She was working for an investment bank, and she was asked to build an LBO, a leverage buyout model. And she said, I had no idea how to build that model. And she stayed up all night trying to build the model. And she presented the model the next day to the person who was in charge of the project. And she could see on his face how disappointed he was. And she became small and receded because she knew she had missed the mark. And she said, but he sat with me and he taught me how to do it. So in that moment, she learned that if you don't understand something, ask for help. But she said, through him, I learned the importance of giving people direct feedback and helping them through that. And that lesson has really transformed not the way she looked at her career, but how she has been able to lead and develop others. Number 6 is one of my other favorites. If you follow me on social media or you've had a conversation with me, I will always say, seek, internalize, and act on feedback. And bring in data points from multiple people, because rarely do you take ideas from different people and end up with an end product that is not better than what you would have done, where you started in the first place. One of my favorite examples of this was I was speaking with somebody who talked about how succeeding in the classroom is often different than succeeding at work. And she said, I was always the student. I got the assignment, I did the research, I wrote the paper, I gave the presentation, and I didn't need to go to office hours to really extract that guidance from my professors. And then she got into the workplace with a top education, and she found herself that she wasn't moving as quickly as she wanted to, and she wasn't setting the world on fire as she had in the past. And she said, I had to de-educate myself. And she learned that getting to the next level in the workplace involves seeking feedback, taking in multiple viewpoints. And she learned that in doing so, she's generating buy-in along the way. And that to get to go from a good idea to a great idea, or get out of just doing the thinking, the working behind your computer, but actually selling that work or implementing that work and having that impact, that's the difference between early in one's career and the next level, or being a tactical leader and then moving to be a strategic leader or an executive, is that really that idea to extract the knowledge and the skills and the talent from across an organization, get people behind an idea, and then help build community in order to push something forward. Somebody else told me an example that she learned from experience and that she has implemented. And she said, you hire somebody new and you work so hard to sift through the resumes and interview the people, and you finally hire someone and you're so excited that you have this great talent on the team. And she's like, don't get so excited. That you're still in the first or second inning. And she said, the next phase is about getting that person really integrated into the organization, helping them learn the context, the culture, the teams, and helping them be impactful and productive and additive in their new environment. And so she said, of course, you give people feedback just in time, and it's reactive as they're doing things, right? And she said, this is a lot of work on me. But after 3 months and then it's 6 months, take a step back and do a comprehensive review. Look at everything they're doing and draw out those themes that can really help them. And she said, it's enabled me to deliver constructive feedback in a thoughtful and balanced way. And it's not hitting them with a lightning bolt and really destabilizing them, but giving them the tools to be successful, and to feel supported in a way that is constructive and direct, and helping them to continue and to really have an impact in their new environment. I call it, in many ways, a virtuous feedback loop. So when you receive feedback, and you probably know this from your own experiences, you receive some feedback, and when you apply it and you put it to work, and then you witness the results, you actually recognize that somebody said something along the way that was really impactful. Now, of course, not every piece of feedback is equal, and you have to decide what's important and what feels right to you, and so on and so forth. But when you recognize that value of feedback, oftentimes what you'll find is that you end up going back and asking for more. And then that cycle repeats itself. And the people who succeed oftentimes are those ones who are willing to listen to feedback and to take in what others have to offer, and to internalize it, to personalize it, to apply it to their own situation, and then to continue. And that's that cycle, which I know I've done this hand gesture a few times because I can see it on this screen. I see my face, but people are, you can escalate your emotions, or you can escalate your growth. And to every yin, there's a yang. And wherever you are, whether it's people in your workplace or the people around you who are really in your personal life who want to see you succeed, receiving feedback, taking it in and applying it are really keys to professional growth, to helping you find focus on where you want to invest, whether it's dollars or time or conversations with people who can help you. But building in that cycle of feedback is not just helpful in a given project, but will help over the course of one's career. And lastly, if nothing else has been actionable, I think that this is one that can be acted upon in everyone's day, is to really think about setting intentions. I like a 5-3-1 rule. You can change those numbers. You might say that's too many things. 5 is way too much. That's fine. Make it a 3-2-1 rule. Pick those numbers that work for you. But go into your day with a to-do list of things that you can cross off and feel a sense of accomplishment. And often that number is 5. That might be sending an email that you've been meaning to send. It might be making a phone call. It might be editing somebody's manuscript, whatever, or article. 5 things you can probably get done in the course of a day. And then identify those 3 projects that may take a few days, might take the week. But at the end of the week, when you say, where did I really move the dial? You can point to 3 things where you took them to the next stage or you made something happen. And then maintain one big long-term project. For many months, it was, how do I take all of these interviews and and curate them in a few different, across a few different themes. And it took a while to take in the information, to think about what I wanted to say, think about which stories were the ones that represented those points, and then try and weed out the ones because there were far more than what I shared today. But to always have one big thing that you are thinking about, in that context of urgent, 5 things to do today versus important long-term initiative, always have that balance of things. Somebody said to me, she said, I keep this list. She said, I keep it on my iPad of the things I need to do. And if I look at the list, it is so intimidating. And I'm trying to reduce my mental load. So what I do is I look and I pick those 5 things and I can say, I can do those 5 things today. And then I can find another maybe 10 or so that I can delegate. And then there may be a handful that are longer term things that I need to figure out how to weave in over the course of time. And that essentially it's an exercise in creating mental space. I also talked to somebody who said, on my commute, I do 2 things. I focus on 2 questions. The first one is, what am I grateful for? And she offered a good tip there. She said, I focus on the last 24 hours because research shows that the specificity of that gratitude really matters. I personally have a journal that every night I write 3 quick things that happened that day. And it's a nice way to transition from a busy day to a quieter evening. The second question she asks is, what am I proud of? And then she said, you know what, giving me a little bit of time to reflect is part of my own self-care. And so whether you take both of these questions or you take one of these questions or you say, this is all crazy and I don't need it, setting intentions for your days and also setting intentions about your learning is really the key, because once you know where to point yourself, that's half the battle. Thinking through and prioritizing where you want to be is the first step to executing a plan and really getting to where you want to grow, whether that's personally, professionally, or anywhere else in your life. And I hope with that something has been shared that resonates. We have a couple minutes for some questions. And so if you have any questions, feel free to drop them into the chat. Or if there's something that I said that you might not agree with, also feel free to do that as well. Or if there's something that may have even resonated with you, I would love to hear what and Judith, I agree. It is so hard it's hard to take criticism. I often liken it to working out, right? You're building a muscle, and our skin is not always as thick as we want it to be, and sometimes it is about, especially in my coaching, I tell my clients a lot of times it's putting ourselves in little experiments, right? And so sometimes maybe that's with your family. I can say my teenage kids are really good at criticizing me or finding the things that when they love to see when I make a mistake. And so putting myself in low stakes environments where I'm subjecting myself to criticism, it's not always easy to take. And I would love to say that I'm graceful upon receiving that feedback. That is not true. But starting with some small experiments sometimes is the way to start. 5-3-1, how do you go about 5-3-1 in terms of priorities? I don't know about you. I have lists. I keep a running list of things, and I also like to, I like having that sense of accomplishment, like I can cross something off a list. And so sometimes it is about taking a project that seems really like, how am I going to get into this? And breaking it into some actionable steps. Or it may be, what are these, like, what are those just urgent things that have to get done? And breaking them into smaller steps, or, listing them out. I do still love, in my notes, in the notes program that I use, I can choose bullets, and I can also choose check boxes, or I can choose numbered lists. And I love the checkbox. And when I check that box to say I've done something, it crosses it out. And I like that satisfaction. I think the three, what are the those multi-day projects? Sometimes those are things that might have a few different steps in the project, and you're not going to finish it all in one day. Or thinking about the project is better if you do some work one day, you go to sleep and look at it the next day. And so you're better off with a few days to work through something. Does that help? Does that provide any insight, or do more questions? I can offer suggestions, but I can't, everyone takes this and does with them what they, personalizes that in a way that they feel good about. It looks like you're typing, so I'm going to answer Lauren, and then I'm going to come back to you, Robert. Thank you. Have I shared this with people ending their careers or young people just starting them? I have shared this with a variety of audiences. I'm always building audience, looking to build audiences, always. And, thank you for all being a gracious audience today. I have something where I'm planning to do this with a younger audience, this exact talk, later this month. And I always thought that this was much better put with a younger audience. And it was only in sharing some of this and learning, and probably also a function of my own network, that I was surprised at how these lessons were impactful to a more mature audience. Because oftentimes this isn't the first time that people have heard these things, but they may have not heard these lessons integrated and woven together in this way, or they may just be good reminders. And so there's the nice thing about this, and as I said earlier, is the universality of these lessons, and that people hear them at different times in their lives and take different things from them. I hope that helps. And thank you, Jennifer. That immediacy of the feedback is, especially, I think it's so easy, we're all like running in 15 different directions and doing so many things, that even that moment of just slowing down and really thinking about what we're grateful for or proud of is a nice way to reflect on what's going on around us, to take inventory, and to actually put a positive light, because so many of us are so good at doubting ourselves, or telling ourselves that we're not good enough for this or that, and to actually reflect on the good, especially in the context of today's world, is just it. I don't know. I can't say much more than that. And prioritization, I think we could probably be here, Robert, for like another few hours talking about prioritization. So maybe that will be next Shavuot.
It looks like Jennifer raised her hand, so I can unmute you, and then I think that's
I
get
think,
it. We have another like 1 or 2 minutes for questions.
yeah.
Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Rachel. This was really excellent. So in a leadership program I've been in, one of the things that we learned, and I'm still trying to really integrate this, is the idea of looking back at your past week and knowing like what would a more ideal execution of that week have been, and also how can you leverage the things you're doing so you don't have to keep recreating, right? The same kind of long version of doing it. Like, for example, learning a software or an app or something that can help you. So, the problem for me, I've been gaining that way of thinking, but I haven't been able to figure out how to designate time to learn the thing that would give me leverage. How do you help your clients or yourself to say, I'm going to stop going through the to do list so I can spend 2 hours? Yes, I'll miss out. I might disappoint myself and a few people, but in another week, I'll have created something that will help me in all the other weeks. I don't know how to make that switch.
Jennifer, that is a really good question, and thank you for asking it. I I wish that there were an easy answer, to be honest. I think, and it becomes quite honestly a lifelong pursuit, right? Of really juggling urgent versus important. And it's so much easier to get stuck in the urgent in that we are reactive, we're getting things done, we're sprinting, we're running. Um, I I love the idea of always taking a few minutes, whether that's on a Sunday before the week starts or waking up early on a Monday morning and creating some organization and intention for the week, to clear that space. Because setting an intention, making a plan is half the battle. Um, and then at the end of the week, going back and looking back at what's happened. What I actually tell my clients sometimes is use that time at the end of the week to um, let your boss or let stakeholders you're working with know what happened. Use that opportunity to communicate. Um, but that doesn't get directly at your question, which is how do you carve out that time and what do you do? Um, what I would offer is put, if you can, and you might come back and say, Rachel, that's crazy. I have no, like, I'm stretched in 1,000 different directions. And it's true. We all, many people feel that way. But if you can find 2 blocks of time, start with 2 half-hour blocks or 2 hour blocks and put them on your calendar. And just in the same way that you would commit to a one-on-one with your boss, keep that time sacred because you've set it aside for your own growth and keep it as a standing meeting. And maybe if you do 2 of those blocks across the week, you end up keeping one of them and the other one, maybe it doesn't work. But if you set the intention and you put aside the time, you are much more likely to make the time than if you don't ever if you never tried to set aside the time in the first place. And so I would say that is a good start. I hope that gives you a little bit of an idea. I know it's time and it's time for me to step off. But what I would say is my email address is here. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, follow me on Instagram, reach out. I would love to continue the conversation if you have further questions. And I don't want to leave you kind of hanging, but I also know that there's a day of presenters, of esteemed presenters, and rabbis who have a lot more knowledge to provide than I do. And so thank you for joining today. And hopefully this can be the beginning of a fruitful and growth-filled conversation. Chag Sameach.
Hag Sameach. Thank you so much, Rachel. Don't sell yourself short. That was so informative.